we're on to week 5. So we hit the beginning of Good Friday, if you remember, last week. Let's here we go. Yeah. So we didn't quite last week. I called it the trials, but then we didn't actually get before Pilate. So we left it in the morning of the Friday. We noticed how, despite the fact that the usual way of understanding the Easter story, Jesus gets arrested on the kind of the Thursday night to Friday morning, and all gets tried at night. And then we actually noticed if you put all of the Gospels together, that there's 2 mornings. That Jesus is arrested on the Wednesday night. The day during Thursday is where the trial is happening proper. There was a kind of discovery period beforehand, which does happen at night. And then, according to the laws of the Mishnah, which I seem to be adhering to, because they've gone for a capital conviction, they have to wait until the next day before they can commute the sentence, or before they can pass sentence, because to all agree on it, gives a kind of cooling off period. And so that's exactly what's happened. Is where we pick up the story this morning. So it's actually about 5 a.m. So I'm calling it before Pilate and sunrise. It's not quite yet sunrise. I'm saying 5 in the morning. So at 5 in the morning, it's actually, I think, about just after 5 that dawn happens, just around this time of year in Jerusalem. So just after 5, the council comes together to confirm their verdict, and they take Jesus off to Pilate. So we actually read, now immediately when morning had come. So see, you notice that in the traditional view that doesn't fit, because of course we normally think of the cock crowing while Peter is still there with Jesus at Annas's house. And then he goes off and gets taken before the Sanhedrin, which is after morning. So now immediately when the morning had come, all the chief priests with the elders and the scribes and the whole council held a consultation against Jesus to put him to death. So this isn't the trial, it's the conviction, it's the kind of confirmation of what they already decided on. And so the whole company of them rose up, and they bound him and led him away and delivered him up, or brought him before Pontius Pilate, the governor. And they led Jesus, therefore, from Caiaphas to the Praetorium. Just a quick flag for those who are catching up. Remember, the different colours are showing where the words come from the different Gospels, so they're all woven together. They led Jesus from Caiaphas to the Praetorium. And it was early. They themselves didn't enter the Praetorium because they didn't want to be defiled, but might eat the Passover. So the kind of the group head off. They take Jesus, so we've got them here on the map. You see there's Annas, and if I hang on, you see that little red mark I'm kind of putting around the priests here. So they've taken Jesus just outside the Praetorium. So here is Pilate and others in the Praetorium. I've actually shown Mary has come into the city at this point. Mary's going to come into the story very early on. She's been out at Bethany, of course. But during the last day, so during the day and the evening before, the various disciples have been turning up at Bethany, where Mary and Martha and Lazarus all are. And so Mary seems to have come in at this point. She's come in to see what's going on. It's possible, very possible, that the disciples don't want to come in because they're not sure if they're wanted at this stage, whether they get recognised in daylight and so on. So we'll put her there. Down at the bottom, we've got some members of Jesus' family, his extended family, and John and his mother as well. So just after sunrise, which, as I say, I think is around 5:20. So they've met. The council have met. They've confirmed what they did the day before. They take Jesus as early as possible to Pilate. We actually know from historical records that Roman governors are expected to start work before dawn. So they get up before dawn and start work. So actually this kind of bringing them together just early in the morning is probably pretty much as soon as the daylight is there that Jesus gets brought before them. So hang on, let's just go back. You notice the lady looking up here. See, I always like to put these characters. Hang on, that was the wrong way. Let's come back. What am I doing? There she. Oh no, there we go. There she is. Right, here you go. Oh, right. Sorry, I'm trying to be too clever. In fact, what I'm going to do, let's change to full screen. Oh, let's move myself there. The lady in the background is actually Pilate's wife, so we'll come to her in a bit. So hang on, have I? Let's Making sure. Okay. So Pilate therefore went out to them. So he has to come out from the Praetorium because they've not gone in, and said, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" So he knows that something is being brought to him. We looked at that. Although it's not in the Gospels, we know that actually from Roman law point of view that they have to make an appointment to see the governor. They can't just turn up. And actually you can tell that from his words. He goes out and asks the question. It's not what are you here for. He knows what they're there for. So he just asks, "What accusation do you bring against this man?" So Jesus stood before the governor. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man perverting the nation, forbidding the paying of taxes to Caesar." Do you remember that's some of the things that probably have come up on the day before? It's not actually true, of course. And saying that he himself is Christ, the king. So Pilate the governor asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered him, "So you say." And the chief priests accused him, saying, when he was accused by the chief priests and the elders, and he answered nothing, Pilate again asked him, "Have you made no answer? Don't you hear how many things they testify against you?" And Jesus doesn't make any answer, not even a word. So Pilate marvelled greatly. And Pilate said to the chief priests and "Have I? Oh yeah, that's right. I find no basis of a charge against this man." But they insisted, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, beginning from Galilee even to this place." You see, so he mentions Galilee at that point. They mention Galilee. And so Galilee actually gives Pilate a way out. So he's come out to hear the case. He's brought it. He's just heard issues about disagreements in Judaism. It's not really, doesn't seem relevant to him. But as they've made their complaint and said he's been teaching all the way from Galilee down to here, it's kind of, whoa, I've got something I can do here, you see. Because Galilee is technically not the governor's jurisdiction. It's governed by Herod Antipas. So I've put here, we kind of some point maybe just after 6 in the morning here. And there's a little bit of what I call political payback, because actually there is a little bit of animosity between Herod and Pilate. Herod had actually taken money from the temple to build the aqueduct, and we know from Josephus that in doing this he caused a riot. And a whole load of people were actually, a whole load of people who had come down for the sacrifices got into a riot in the temple at Passover, and Pilate had executed them. And it's probably, therefore, we get a reference to that in Luke's Gospel, where it says, "Now there were some present at the time who told him," i.e. Jesus, about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. So this is earlier on in Luke's Gospel when Jesus is down for that there are those telling Jesus about the recent news. Now we can't be 100% sure, but it looks like the aqueduct is finished around 31 AD. And that seems to be therefore the cause. So maybe 31, 32 AD. Perhaps 32 AD, because I think if you put all of Jesus's visits down to Passover, he does seem to miss at least one Passover. So I think if that was about 32, that would be the time when they're saying you hear about what happened. And so anyway, these Galileans get kind of massacred by Pilate, which kind of matches what Josephus tells us. But Josephus also tells us that then Herod, who is the king over Galilee, had complained to Rome about what had happened. And so, it's kind of like grassing up to the teacher. And so there has been now tension between Herod and Pilate. So you can see a kind of almost a kind of perhaps a little bit of, in sending Jesus, it's kind of, okay, I'm not going to make another mess up like I did a couple of years ago with those Galileans. If he's Galilean, we're going to let Herod sort it out this time. And if he makes a mess up, maybe I can tell on him to Caesar. But actually, the result of the whole thing, as we have it told to us by Luke, is, of course, that the two become friends from that very day. But before, they were enemies with each other. And this is part of just one of the little elements which fits better with a 33 AD date for the crucifixion than a 30 AD date for the crucifixion. It's not conclusive because, when you look at history and some of these things, you have to try and piece the bits together. And so you could do it another way, but it seems to be an easier fit if it's about 33 AD. And then there's other reasons why I often go for 33 anyway, as we'll see. So it gives him that way of kind of getting out of the problem. It's only a few minutes walk across the top of the hill towards the temple. So about 10 minutes walk to take Jesus over to Pilate's summer residences, which are held in the old Hasmonean Palace. So he sends Jesus over there. The priests go with them. And we read, so then when Pilate heard Galilee mentioned, he asked if the man was a Galilean. When he found he was in Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was in Jerusalem during those days. So when Herod saw Jesus, he was really glad, exceedingly glad, because he'd wanted to see him for a long time, because he'd heard all these things about him, and he hoped to see some miracles done by him. So he questioned him with loads of words, but he, i.e. Jesus, gave no answer, and the chief priests and scribes stood vehemently accusing him. So they're really having a go for it. Herod and his soldiers humiliated him, i.e. Jesus, and mocking him. They dressed him in luxurious clothes. They sent him back to Pilate. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day. But before that, they were enemies with each other. So in this strange way, the trial of Jesus actually kind of draws these two together. Now, you put all those together, and of course, we've got to say, how do we know about what's going on here? And of course, the answer is Chusa, if you recognise him from earlier weeks. This is Chusa, who is described as being Herod's steward, his wife Joanna, who we saw last week, who is probably also the Apostle Junia. I actually checked after we did it last week. I actually went to look at how you decline the name in Latin, and actually there's only one letter difference between declining Joanna in Latin and Junia in Latin. And as we looked at last week, there is probably just a Latinized way of describing the same Hebrew name. But anyway, so Chusa is there as the steward. He's the chief financial officer, apparently. The word is used for a number of roles, but the most obvious one that he has when it comes to Herod Antipas is his kind of chief financial officer. So he's a significant character, but he's likely to be down there. And something about that network means that actually he becomes aware of Jesus's presence. And some way or other, therefore, he kind of notifies his wife and some of her connections, who would have been the women who followed Jesus from Galilee. So Jesus gets sent back to Pilate. Sorry, I got my timings a little bit out there, because I know there's always some eagle-eyed people. If I go back, sorry. Yeah, you see there, I got to Friday morning at 6:20. I think I should have been probably aiming for more like 5:30 at that stage. I probably put them the wrong way around or something. But it's probably around, and I'm always, these are always estimated times, so don't hold me to them. It's just about trying to move the story forwards with the kind of with the markers that kind of put in a fixed point. So it comes back to Pilate. So here he is. But now back to Pilate. Let's go. Pilate called the chief priests and the rulers and said, "You brought him to me as one who perverts the people. And I've examined him, and I found no basis of a charge against him concerning these things of which you accuse him. Neither has Herod, because I sent him to him. So nothing worthy of death has been done. Therefore, I'm going to just chastise him and release him." But as I say, now what we have, of course, is we have some of the women from Galilee. We've got Joanna there and Susanna. So Joanna is the one in orange, not that we know what she really looks like, but just if you're following the story. And I've assumed that Mary has somehow connected to them. Mary, as we've told the story here, I'm going to make the assumption is the Mary of Bethany. I think that's the right one, the right assumption. Can't be conclusive about it, but it fits well. It's hard to understand the role of the two. The significance of Mary, who's the name Magdalene, which can mean tower-like, who's a towering figure, and actually the significance of the anointing for Jesus for burial and so on. The two fit best together if you see them as the same character. She has been following Jesus since Galilee. Jesus has first encountered her probably up in Galilee, even though her family seems to be down in Bethany. And she's listed alongside Joanna and Susanna in Luke's Gospel back there. So as they've come into the story, if Mary has come into Jerusalem to try and find out what has happened to Jesus since his arrest 2 nights ago, because of the testimony the disciples have brought to her, somehow she's connected up with them. And they become part of the crowd that is beginning to form. Now remember, it's still early in the morning. It's also in the smart part of the city, right at the top of the hill, and where people don't tend to go unless you live there. So, although there's a major gate that comes in next to the Praetorium, it's not the huge crowds that greeted Jesus into Jerusalem, who were over on the east side as we looked at it. This is now on the west side, in the smart suburbs. So it's not the same group. Because we often make a bit of a teaching thing, don't we? You know, the crowds that greeted him on Palm Sunday are shouting for his death on Good Friday. But actually the context is very, very different. The people who most know that something is already... it's only those who really know there's something already happening, either because they're anti-Jesus or they are somehow connected via the disciples and family that are making up this crowd. So kind of coming back into the mix. So they answered him, if this man weren't an evildoer, of course we wouldn't have delivered him up to you. So Pilate said to him, take him yourself and judge him according to your law. But the Jews said to him, it's not lawful for us to put anyone to death, that the word of Jesus might be fulfilled, which he spoke, signifying what kind of death he should die. On the whole, if he was going to die purely under Jewish jurisdiction, it would have been one of those slightly edgy things, probably with a stoning or pushing off the edge of the parapet of the temple, which of course is something that Jesus is tempted to do, to show something, and is something that happens to James the Just, Jesus' brother, which you can read about in the annals by Josephus, who tell us how he is martyred by pushing off the edge of the temple, whereby they can kind of say, well, we just got kind of worked up about stuff and it just happened, you see. But actually Jesus is going to be formally executed, so it has to happen the way it does. So Pilate then takes Jesus inside the Praetorium. So the priests stay outside because they don't want to go into the Praetorium because they would then be defiled and wouldn't be able to eat the Passover. So they're waiting outside, kind of glowering in. And Pilate therefore entered into the Praetorium, called Jesus to him and said, are you king of the Jews? And Jesus answered, do you say this by yourself or because others told you about me? And Pilate answered, well, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation, your chief priest delivered you to me. So what have you actually done? And Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of the world, then my servants would fight, and I wouldn't be delivered to the Jews. I wouldn't be delivered to you by the Jews. But now my kingdom is not from here. And we read the words, but there's obviously something of a moment. There's obviously some authority in the way Jesus speaks them. There's something that obviously cuts right into Pilate. So Pilate then, he asked again, are you the king then? And Jesus answered, you say that I am. And for this reason I've been born. For this reason I've come into the world, that I should testify to the truth. And everyone who's the truth listens to my voice. And that's the bit, as I say, it seems to kind of cut in. So we have this famous kind of quote from Pilate. What is truth? Qui est veritas in Latin. I remember that from watching the Passion of the Christ film, if you remember. Qui est veritas? What is truth? And it kind of works in so many ways. There's a kind of a level in which you see this, that has Pilate become so cynical. And actually those very often at the top in governance, actually they have this relationship with truth. With, in the end, what is truth other than whoever's in power and what they say? And that's really played itself out in the kind of political sense over the last year. We've seen it working out on our television screens. You know, the propaganda wars that go on with the invasion of Ukraine, or the truckers' protests in Canada, where the narratives are so different on the different sides, and in the end you feel that the politicians are just playing a game which, if you say it enough and you've got enough authority, then it can be truth. So there's a kind of a question where there's a sort of, you could hear it as in a cynicism way, kind of a cynical way, but equally you can hear it in a kind of almost a challenged way. And what is truth? Actually there's something that actually in our hearts knows that truth is really important. So we make claims to truth, and we even con ourselves as to our truthfulness, because reality and truthfulness is very important to us. Even if we don't do it, we want to be seen as being truthful. And so you can kind of sense that there's also a kind of an element of it cutting and convicting into Pilate. It's interesting that in the Eastern Orthodox, there's the church, there's the tradition that both Pilate and his wife, who we're going to meet in a minute, actually become Christians. The traditions around Pilate's wife seem to be stronger, and they make more sense with the text. But it's just kind of interesting to note it, because if that is the case, then there's something of this kind of conviction moment. And he went out again to the Jews and said to them, I don't find any basis for a charge against him. So taking him back outside. So when therefore they were gathered together, Pilate said to them, but you've got a custom that I should release someone to you at the Passover. Therefore, do you want me to release to you the King of the Jews? Who do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who's called Christ? Because he perceived or knew that it was because of envy that the chief priests had delivered Jesus up. So here's Barabbas. He gives them the option. So we get a little bit more explanation as you put the Gospels together. At the feast, the governor was accustomed or used to release to the multitude one prisoner whom they desired or asked at the feast. And they had then a notable prisoner, one called Barabbas, bound with those who made insurrection, men who in the insurrection had committed murder. And the multitude cried aloud and began to ask him to do as he always did for them. And just to again, we know the name Barabbas. Some of the early manuscripts of the Gospels, though, actually give Barabbas his full name. And his full name is actually Jesus Barabbas. And as time went on, some of the manuscripts used to drop the name Jesus because it seemed too dishonouring. But in kind of doing so, it kind of slightly obscures something, which is kind of interesting. So, yes, of course, it's probably around this point, I'm going to put, where actually Pilate's wife intervenes. Tradition tells us her name's Clauda Procula. I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be. It's just that some people don't like it because it's only Christians who record it, because Roman authorities don't care. But the Christian commentators give her a name as part of, they tell the story of how she ended up being a follower of Jesus. So Clauda Procula intervenes, and she actually kind of says, look, what? So while he's sitting at the judgment seat, his wife sent him saying, have nothing to do with this righteous man, because I suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. And there's a kind of an implication in that. It kind of suggests this idea that actually the appointment to say we want to bring this character Jesus to you, whether Pilate would have known who the name Jesus referred to at that stage, but it's come in the day before. And you can kind of imagine, as Pilate has kind of come home and to eat with his wife, and it's kind of what's going on at the moment. Well, tomorrow morning I've got a case. The Jewish authorities want me to execute this preacher from Galilee or preacher from wherever, and the conversation, and so she's aware of that, and then she goes to sleep. And of course, it's quite possible it's a purely supernatural dream, but very often, just my own experience, even of the supernatural, is it's often a blend of the natural and the supernatural, the things you become aware of, and then somehow you see something different as the Lord speaks to you on something. But something along those lines has happened and prompted her to do something, which clearly, in Pilate, who is a real military man, a real military leader, and is described in the Talmuds, or maybe it's in Philo, I can't remember now, as being quite excessive in his violence when he decides to do something. So he's not shy about being aggressive, but there's something about him now that feels conflicted. And as I said, he's it used to be said, and perhaps it's why it's worth kind of highlighting it, that the account of Pilate in the Gospels doesn't make sense of the other things we know about him from history. But you notice that little bit where I said that actually the reference about sending Jesus to Herod because he was Galilean, that incident got Pilate into so much trouble. and there was also something that happens up in Rome at the same time, which is that the kind of the hierarchy of the government is now changing. And a guy by the name of Sejanus, who's been vehemently anti-Semitic against Jews across the empire, has suddenly been executed. He's been removed aside and been executed. And so now there is a new kind of regime in place. And so Pilate is suddenly, at this particular point in history, it wasn't true before, but he's suddenly vulnerable to the claims of "you're no friend of Caesar," which is going to come later. So you kind of do get that sense of that as you read the gospel accounts. So, as it in that kind of context, then the mob starts shouting for Barabbas. And it's probably about this stage then that I'm going to say that John turns up with Jesus's family. So if you remember last week, John, who's been there at Annas's house through the night while Jesus is being interrogated, and he leaves in the morning shortly after Peter has gone out because the cock has crowed. And the question is, where does he go? Well, he's going to turn up again now, but actually he's not just him, but actually we see there's an extended sense of Jesus's family in the mix. We'll kind of unpack those as we go through. So I put a comment here on Jesus' family and other friends. There are various members of Jesus' family turn up at some point in the proceedings. So he's presumably tracked them down over the Thursday. So we know Joanna and Susanna have found out what's happening because of their association with Herod. Mary Magdalene, or the sister of Mary, the sister of Martha and Lazarus, may have actually kind of connected with those women first because she's come into town and she wants to find out what's happened to Jesus. She's spent time travelling with women who've got connections into the authorities, even though they're Galilean rather than Judean. She probably would think to herself they would have a good chance of finding out what's gone on. So she may well have gone to them, so she comes drawn in. But then in Jesus' family, there's a group that consists of at least Mary, who's Jesus' mother, of course, but also Clopas, his uncle, which we don't know that because the Gospels don't tell us that, but the early church does. And his wife Mary, who's the mother of James the Less, is it James Less or James the bigger one? I can't remember. And his wife Mary, yeah. So Jesus' uncle and aunt on Joseph's side. There you go. And Salome, he could be Jesus' aunt on his mother's side as well. So there's at least those folks there. There are others possible as well. The early church tells us that the disciple on the road to Emmaus with Clopas is actually his son Simon, which is another son, who therefore would be he would be a nephew of Jesus in that sense. So there seem to be members of Jesus' family. The disciples, of course, are decidedly absent. It's only John who's there. So just a quick kind of comment on this thing. So Barabbas, whose full name is Jesus Barabbas, which actually kind of means Jesus, son of the Father, which is kind of interesting because you sort of have now the ceremony of the scapegoat being acted out, which of course is the ceremony that shapes Yom Kippur. It's kind of being prophetically acted out. So in the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, you bring two goats, two identical goats, perfect goats, and the high priest decides between them, and one is given as the scapegoat, and the other is made as a sacrifice to the Lord, on behalf of the people. And so it kind of feels like the scapegoat is the one that's kind of got away with it. But actually, no, that both goats die. So it's just one of those shocking things you don't realise. It's not, we tend to think, well, it gets pushed outside the camp. It gets ripped to pieces by wild animals. In fact, the idea of the scapegoat dying was so important that there are actually records in the Talmuds that on one occasion there was a goat that came back wandered back to the city after it was supposed to have been offered as the scapegoat, and so the priest kind of drag it back out to the desert again and push it over a cliff, because it is important it kind of goes out there to die. So one dies a pointless death, but kind of in its own time, if that makes sense. And one, it gives up its life as a sacrifice on behalf of the others. And this is the Day of Atonement ceremony. So although, of course, this is Passover, not the Day of Atonement, but it's just interesting how you have these two identical, Jesus Barabbas and Jesus Bar Abba, Jesus, son of the Father, or so Bar Haba it should be, so, or Bar Abba. Barabbas is son of the Father. Bar Abba is son of the Father. So that you got the two there, and there's something there for, as I say, being kind of prophetically acted out for those that would see it. So here we go. Here's the little bit of a reference. So he'll take the two goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and Aaron, the high priest, shall cast lots upon the two goats, one for the Lord and the other for the scapegoat. And Aaron shall bring the goat upon which the Lord's lot fell and offer him as a sin offering, you see. But the goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement for him and to let him go for a scapegoat into the wilderness. And as I say, but the reality is the scapegoat, although he goes off and he dies in his own time, but it is a death. It definitely happens. And so you get that kind of that nice sort of little prophetic model, and even the fact that here you have the high priest who is effectively making the choice, not by casting of lots, but by stirring up the crowd. So where we got to? Yeah, so the mob continued in that place of calling. So so the chief priests and the elders persuaded or stirred up the multitude to ask that they should he should release Barabbas for them instead and destroy Jesus. Then they all shouted together again, saying, "Not this man, away with this man, but release to Barabbas." Now Barabbas was a robber, one who had been thrown into prison for a certain revolt in the city and for murder. And in his strange way, if you like, very symbolically, again, the sacrifice of Jesus actually buys him the rest of his life. But Pilate the governor spoke and answered them, saying, Do you want me to release for you Jesus? Which of the two do you want me to release to you? But they shouted and said, Barabbas. And you can see this combination of the personal conviction from the words Jesus has spoken to him, the warning from his wife, who he seems to take seriously, the recognition also of the precariousness of his situation, because if he's not seen now as a friend of Jesus, a friend of Caesar's, he's in a precarious place. You can see as he equivocates around these things. So Pilate says, "What shall I do then to Jesus, who's called the Christ, and to whom you call the King of the Jews? Then what shall I do with him?" And they all said to him, "Let him be crucified," and cried out again, "Crucify him, crucify him." But the governor said to them a third time, so you see him really trying, "Why? What evil has this man done? I found no capital crime in him, so I'll just chastise him and release him." But they were urgent and cried out exceedingly with loud voices, asking that he might be crucified. And their voices and the voices of the chief priests prevailed, saying, "Let him be crucified, crucify him." So, of course, so when Pilate saw there was nothing to be gained, but rather that a disturbance was starting, he took water, washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I'm innocent of the blood of this righteous person, you see to it." And all the people answered, "May his blood be on us and on our children." And it is one of those things we look back with huge kind of poignancy, because you think about what happens to the generations of the children that come after, and just literally a generation after, who pay the price as Jerusalem itself is now destroyed, and so on. And it's impossible for us to say from our position in hindsight, where something has now happened, how things may have been different if there was a way in which Jesus gets delivered up, in which there is not, if you like, the full complicity and consequence taken on the authorities of Israel, how different history might have been, or might have played itself out. And I won't try and get into all of the theology of that, but I find it almost impossible to read those words, taking it on us and on our children, without having those questions go through your head. It's still, as I say, it's still pretty early Friday morning, so I've got it down there as about 7 at this stage, which is sort of, can seem like it's surprising, but the Herod's palace and Pilate's Praetorium, they're not that far apart. And yes, there's going to be some time as they kind of come together, but it doesn't. We've been going now for a couple of hours. And Pilate decrees that what they asked for should be done, wishing to please the multitude. So he released to them Barabbas, who'd been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, for whom they'd asked. But he delivered Jesus up to their will and handed him over to be flogged and delivered. I've just realised my picture's not there, which is always very boring when you watch the... let me put myself back. There you go. So, do you know, I've been expressing myself at the video camera, and nobody's been able to see it. So I'm back now. I got rid of it so you could read the full words. He flogged him and delivered him over to be crucified. So Pilate took Jesus and flogged him, and the flogging itself is of course a really violent process. As be aware that. So the governor's soldiers took Jesus, led him away to the court, which is the Praetorium. And they gathered together the whole cohort or the garrison against him. They stripped him, clothed him in a purple garment, put a scarlet robe on him. Possibly these are the ones that Jesus has come back from Herod in. Maybe they're being used again. They twist or braided a crown of thorns and crushed it onto his head, and a reed in his right hand. And they kneeled before him, began to salute him and mocked him. Kept saying, "Hail, the King of the Jews." And they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head with the reed. And they kept slapping him and bowing their knees and did homage to him, saying, "Hail, the King of the Jews." And Pilate went out again, so said, "Behold, I bring him out to you." So he's gone through this process. He's been whipped. And Pilate brings him out and says, "Remember, I find no basis for charge against him." And so Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple garment. And Pilate said, "Behold the man." But the chief priests cried, and the officers saw him. They shouted, saying, "Crucify, crucify." And so Pilate said to them, "Take him yourselves and crucify him, because I find no basis for a charge against him." And the Jews answered, "You have a law, and by our law he ought to die." Because you see, Pilate is still trying to kind of say, look, he's been punished now. He's had some sort of punishment. He had a beating. He's been mocked. But they still want it. He ought to die. So when therefore Pilate heard this, he was more afraid, and he entered into the Praetorium again and said to Jesus, "Where are you from?" And Jesus gave him no answer. And Pilate therefore said to him, "Aren't you speaking to me? Don't you know that I have power to release you, and you have power to crucify you?" And Jesus answered, "You have no power at all against me, unless it were given to you from above." So he delivered him. So he who delivered me to you has greater sin. It's almost as if Jesus is kind of giving Pilate permission to do what he needs to do. And at this, Pilate was seeking to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you aren't Caesar's friend." You see, and that's a kind of a key threat. Because actually Pilate has been he's been a favourite of Sejanus, who's been managing the empire, and actually it seems that he may have been planning a coup. So when the emperors realise that he's in a precarious place, he has to be seen very clearly to be a friend of Caesar at this stage in history. Anyone who makes himself out to be a king speaks against Caesar. So when Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus out and sat him down on the judgment seat, Gabbatha, called the pavement. Now it was preparation day, the Passover. It was about the 6th hour, and he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." And they cried out, away with him, crucify him." Pilate said, "Shall I crucify your king?" And the chief priests answered, "We have no king but Caesar." So then he delivered him up to be crucified. When they'd mocked him, they took the purple robe off him and put on his own clothes again. So they took Jesus and led him away to crucify him. So it says there it's about the 6th hour. In my kind of timings, I would make it about 7 o'clock at this stage. But the way John writes his gospel, if you look at it carefully, that phrase with the full stop after it, about the 6th hour, is really the end. This kind of, he said to the Jews, "Behold your king." It's about the 6th hour, is kind of the conclusion of Jesus's trial before Pilate. And that Jesus came back to Pilate after being sent to Herod. He's been sent to Herod before 6 o'clock in the morning. It's about the 6th hour. And I remember in the ancient world, chronology it is not so ingrained in the way it is to us. Once sun up has happened, you're kind of keeping a kind of mental note of how far it seems to have gone through the day. So, and the Romans start counting from midnight. So about the 6th hour it means some point after 6. I make it probably just after 7 as I work it through, but that's not really a big shock, because in a world where people don't wear timepieces, it's probably fair enough to say about the 6th hour. I remember years back I did courses at the Fuller Seminary, and part of the courses we did, because a lot of people training as missionaries were on the kind of different nuances in different languages and cultures. And one of the things that was flagged, I remember, was just always given as a throwaway comment by the lecturer, was, obviously here at Fuller, in Los Angeles, if we say I'm going to meet you at 1 o'clock, I mean 1 o'clock. If I was down in Latin America saying, and I said 1 o'clock, it could be anything between 1 and about 2. And if I'm in Africa and I say it's about 1 o'clock, it could be any time from about 11 till about 3 in the afternoon. It's just in that kind of when the sun's kind of sort of there in the sky. So we've got to kind of allow that a little bit as we're trying to integrate the different gospels. And so about the 6th hour, yes, Jesus comes to before Pilate for the final time, which leads to the releasing him to be crucified. just after 6. It's probably just after 7 about this stage now. So anyway, they cry out. So Pilate, delivered them up to them to be crucified. So when they mocked him, they took him to crucify him. So, yes, there you go. I've got my comments about the 6th hour, which I've just given you. So Pilate's final verdict, Jesus the King, the whole process started around 6:20 after he was returned from Herod, although it's probably maybe 7 or even 7:30 when that final sentence is issued. So Jesus is therefore led away towards Golgotha. And of course, we know about this guy Simon of Cyrene. Before we just talk about Simon